Number 3. The King. January 8th, 1935. While his wife is fighting her way through a long childbirth in a one-room Mississippi shack, a man named Vernon steps outside to smoke a cigarette. It's 2 a.m. and the nervous father-to-be fumbles with the matches in the pitch dark. Suddenly, the matchbox becomes plainly visible thanks to a bright, dazzling blue light. Vernon looks around for the source of the light. The blue lights are hovering 100 feet above him. Impossible, he thinks. There's not a building in 20 miles that's higher than 3 floors. The blue lights dazzle Vernon until he hears the cries of a newborn baby inside. And then, just as suddenly as they came, the lights are gone. Perhaps they originate from the new hydroelectric dams created by Franklin Roosevelt's Tennessee Valley Authority. But the nearest dam was miles away. Or perhaps they are from training exercises performed by the new mono-wing planes at nearby Key Airfield. But then, why were the lights hovering? No airplane can hover. Or, perhaps, they were emitted by an unidentified flying object. When Vernon went back inside, the doctor asked him what the lights were. Vernon said he didn't know, but he thought they may be signifying something special about his newborn son, Elvis Aaron Presley. Vernon later told the story to Elvis in 1943 when the future King of Rock and Roll was 8 years old. Right after, the boy Elvis had his own close encounter. As he later told his friend and hairstylist, Larry Geller, Elvis underwent a strange experience in his yard as a child. Lights appeared above him. But this time the lights in the sky coincided with visions. Aliens, Elvis believed, had sent him glimpses of his future by means of mental telepathy. In one of those visions, a now-grown Elvis was wearing a white jumpsuit, similar to the ones he would become famous for 30 years later. From that point on, Elvis held a firm belief in the existence of UFOs and extraterrestrials, and they would follow him throughout his life. According to a book called Elvis, What Happened, another close encounter occurred when Elvis was driving down New Mexico's famed Route 66. Riding along were 2 members of his so-called Memphis Mafia, Jerry Schilling and Sonny West. As they were driving, they saw a bright disc flash across the sky. "That's not a shooting star," Elvis is reported to have said. "That's something different." The object then stopped on a dime, turned 45 degrees while hovering, and shot off into the black night sky. Schilling swore that they had just seen a flying saucer because, he said at the time, "We don't make anything that moves like that." Elvis was convinced his friend was right. Another close encounter occurred in the late 60s when Elvis and West were strolling on the grounds of his mansion in Bel Air, California. Just a few miles from Hollywood, a noted UFO hotspot, the mansion was often well lit up at night. But Elvis and West were stunned when they were both bathed in bright lights from above. Sonny shielded his eyes, wondering why the helicopter was flying so low. But Elvis pointed out that there were no sounds of engines or rotors. He ordered Sonny to run and get Schilling so he could see it too. By the time West returned with Schilling, they were alarmed to find that Elvis was gone. Thinking he had been abducted by aliens, the 2 men performed a quick search. And they were relieved to find the King a few doors down, trying to follow the lights as they moved over the neighborhood. Though these reports of these stories don't recall the color of lights, it's possible they were blue, like the ones Elvis's father saw on the night he was born. Blue lights that would have an incredible impact on Elvis for the rest of his life. Cases in point: Blue Hawaii, Blue Christmas, Blue Moon of Kentucky, and of course, those blue suede shoes. Number 2. The Politician. A few months after Elvis's UFO sighting near Hollywood on January 6, 1969, another man would have a similar experience, thousands of miles away in a place called Leary, Georgia. A man named James Carter had been asked by the local Lions Club to give a speech. The 45-year-old man with salt and pepper hair was a well-respected member of the farming community in Georgia. And as a former state senator, he was no stranger to public speaking. During the talk, he spoke with humor and self-deprecation as he recounted the lessons he learned in both politics and farming. Delivered in a warm, southern drawl, the speech was well received by locals who had crammed into a smoky high school cafeteria for the occasion. When his talk was over, Mr. Carter joined a dozen other folks as they stepped outside to get some air. "What's that, over in the west?" Mr. Carter later recalled someone shouting. As everyone looked in the direction of the pointing man, they were shocked to see a white orb flying high in the sky. The color of the radiating orb changed to blue and then red before changing back to white. Then it seemed to move towards us from a distance, stop, move partially away, return, then depart, Carter recalled, further describing the orb as luminous and not solid. For the next 10 minutes, Mr. Carter and others watched in awe as the object, estimated to be 500 yards away, performed all kinds of aerial maneuvers. And then, it was gone. Carter was so taken with the encounter that he immediately used the Lions Club cassette player to record his eyewitness account. 5 years later, the International UFO Bureau, based out of Oklahoma, wrote a letter to Mr. Carter urging him to officially report his 1969 sighting. And Mr. Carter obliged, despite the strenuous objections of his friends and advisors. In his report, Carter further detailed the encounter, writing that it occurred shortly after dark and that the object was self-luminous. He signed his full name on the report, along with his occupation, Governor of Georgia. James Carter, called Jimmy by just about everyone, would go on to become the first sitting U.S. president to have reported seeing an unidentified flying object. For a president living in a tabloid age, the admission would bring scores of ridicule and scoffs of impossibility. UFO skeptic Robert Schaefer would try to debunk Carter's close encounter by calling it nothing more than a misidentification of the planet Venus. Venus was visible in the night sky in Georgia on the night in question. And Venus is often observed to change colors thanks to local atmospheric conditions. But Schaefer doesn't account for the fact that Carter reported the object he saw was only, quote, slightly smaller than the apparent size of the moon, unquote. Other debunkers brought forth other explanations. One military man believed what Carter saw that night were atmospheric experiments conducted by the Elgin Rocket Range in Florida. But the origin of the UFO isn't nearly as important as the lasting impact it had on the future president. Despite being ridiculed for coming forward, Jimmy Carter never once backtracked on his belief that he saw a UFO that night. And in the ensuing years, he never once changed his story. What Carter did do in the early days of his administration was loosen the red tape surrounding government classified documents. His changes to the Freedom of Information Act have been a boon to researchers and skeptics alike. I don't laugh at people anymore when they said they've seen UFOs, Carter said later. I've seen one myself. It's the darndest thing I have ever seen. Number 1. The Pilot. The rugged, handsome man behind the controls of the TMB 700 turboprop airplane had been a pilot for 3 years. Based at Burbank Airport in Los Angeles, he was used to easy 2-hour flights to places like Vancouver, Las Vegas, and Phoenix. In fact, The Arizona capital was his destination on the night of March 13th, 1997. Ever the doting dad and looking for any excuse to get behind the yoke, the pilot was happy to ferry his 20-year-old son, Ollie, to Phoenix to see his girlfriend. As the pilot and his son approached Sky Harbor Airport, it was full dark. About 8:30 p.m. "Hey Pa, what are those lights?" the son asked. The pilot saw them too. And because he was only half a mile from touchdown, he was concerned the lights might affect his approach and landing. So he radioed the Phoenix control tower. "Sky Harbor, this is Bonanza 2 Tango Sierra," the pilot said. "What are you guys painting tonight over the airport?" The term painting refers to the readout on a radar signal in the control tower. "We're not showing anything. What are you seeing?" the air traffic controller asked. What the pilot and his son were seeing were 6 lights, possibly from 6 different sources, flying low and slow over the airport in a triangular or V formation. The lights were seen by an estimated 20,000 residents of Phoenix that night, and many of those people reported what they saw. They filed reports with law enforcement, the media, the Arizona National Guard, Luke Air Force Base, the National Weather Service, and even the National UFO Reporting Center. But the pilot, actor Kurt Russell, was the only general aviation pilot to file a report with Sky Harbor Airport that night. Russell and his son, fellow actor Oliver Hudson, thought nothing more of their experience until years later, after the light show over Arizona had gained a reputation. To ufologists, the phenomenon came to be known as the Phoenix Lights event, and it remains today one of the most widely seen UFOs in American history. But what was Kurt Russell seeing in the skies over Arizona in 1997? Believers swear it was a genuine UFO. The U.S. military, on the other hand, swears that the lights were training flares. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in the middle. The first reporting of the lights came at 6:55 p.m. from a man in Henderson, Nevada, about 300 miles from Phoenix. Over an hour later, at 8:10 p.m., Ross Nickel and his family reported seeing the lights over Chino Valley, Arizona, about 100 miles from Phoenix. He described what he saw as 5 lights arranged in a V formation, flying south. The lights, he said, changed from white to red, and the object or objects emitting the lights made no sound. This is consistent with many other reports from witnesses. Most agree that the object was delta-shaped like a V or a chevron and had 5 lights, one at the tip and the other 4 coming down the wings. Most also agree that the color of lights cycled through 2 different colors. From most accounts too, the object moved so slowly it seemed to hover. At 10 p.m., Phoenix resident Michael Sistron pulled out his video camera and pressed record. But the video Sistron took that night is inconsistent with witness reports. It shows 5 bright, solid yellow lights in a lineup, not a V, and each light appears successfully higher than the next. That video, some believe, is in line with an official explanation. When pressed for an explanation for the lights, the Air Force declined to get involved. 3 months after the incident, Colonel John Haynes told a Pentagon media briefing that the Air Force no longer does any investigation of UFOs. However, 2 days after the incident, Lieutenant Colonel Mike Hauser of Luke Air Force Base near Phoenix said, "We just know it was not one of our planes." And yet, the Air Force eventually admitted that the lights were caused by an A-10 Warhog dropping flares during a military exercise. These flares, called Lu-2s, are designed to penetrate the dark with ultra-bright phosphor, and they are attached to parachutes, which keeps them in the sky longer. The falling nature of the lights seen in the video are consistent with phosphor lights, and they seem to be descending. But the Air Force also admitted that these flare exercises weren't started until after 10 p.m., the same time as Michael Siston's video recording. But that's 3 hours after the first sighting of the Phoenix Lights. Drop flares don't normally stay aloft for 3 hours, and they certainly don't travel 300 miles before touching down on land. The Arizona governor at the time, Fife Smigington, believes the two events occurred separately. And he might know, because aside from being a former pilot and Air Force officer, he was also a witness to the lights that night. I was never happy with the Air Force's silly explanation, he told CNN in 2007. There might have been military flares in the sky that evening, but what I and hundreds of others saw had nothing to do with that. The Phoenix Lights appeared over Arizona again a few months later and have been spotted several times since then. So far, no answers and no earthly explanation has surfaced. Thank you so much for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. If you did find it interesting, please make sure you subscribe. We'll have a new video about the paranormal every week. If you just discovered this channel, please make sure you check out our other channel, Criminally Listed. We have over 325 videos featuring bizarre but true crime stories. You can find it at youtube.com/criminallylisted. We also have a podcast about cold cases that were eventually solved called Criminally Listed Presents Into the Killing. You can find it on Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and anywhere you find great podcasts. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.